So it's the year 2000, and legendary artist Akira Toriyama sits down in his studio to draw a tank for fun.
This little tank, piloted by an old man, proves more difficult to draw than Toriyama expects. But since he's already made it this far and has already outlined the basis of an entire story around this drawing of a tank, he stubbornly decides to finish what would grow into the modest little manga one-shot, Sandland.
While not his only post-Dragon Ball one-shot from around the turn of the millennium, Sandland stands out as the most developed. A 14-chapter story set in a vast, seemingly global desert about an old man named Rao with a dark past, the demon prince Beelzebub, and another older man named Thief. He's actually a demon, can't you tell? Look at his hair. Journeying together on a quest to find the Phantom Lake, a legend that could provide water for all the people of the Kingdom of Sandland if it weren't for the evil king hoarding it all for himself. It's a simple story that ends just as soon as it starts getting interesting. But it's the kind of more than the sum of its parts work that only a master of their craft like Toriyama could just fart out. Here's a guy who'd spent the previous 2 decades honing and refining and seismically shifting the landscape of an entire subgenre of comics, just kinda shitposting. Treating this manga like the purest writing exercise ever, a technical endeavor leaning heavily on tropes that, over the course of its story, develop into something only slightly more substantial than what it starts out as.
But it's that simplicity that gives room for Toriyama's compositions to scream off the page. There's a life and vibrancy to these characters, constrained as they might be by the scope of their tale, that is truly infectious. Beelzebub is a more petulant and angsty Goku, a sort of proto-baby Vegeta, full of this wild, abrasive charm that gels perfectly with Rao's somber, supportive, ultimately heroic disposition, and Thief's curmudgeonly weirdo old man Riz. Seeing these weird little guys bicker over whose turn it is to drive the tank, or act decisively under the pressure of a tense battle, or console each other and grow closer as friends, is as fun as it is cozy.
And it's also an excuse for Toriyama to show us some really cool-looking tanks. Toriyama loves really cool-looking tanks. He likes cool motorcycles and bipedal robots and capsules and stuff too, but let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Over the course of their search for water for the people of Sandland, our motley crew of heroes fights off a battalion of tanks, encounters a gang of weird resistance fighters called the Swimmers, tips a tank onto its side to blow a hole in an airship, form an alliance with the determined yet misguided Royal Army General Are, and finally discover the fabled Phantom Lake. Yet Sandland, for all its narrative simplicity and aesthetic bombast, hides a darker, more serious undercurrent. 30 years ago, the Kingdom of Sandland mobilized its tank brigade, led by Rao, in a genocide against the Pichi, a race of alien beings who, the king proclaimed, were constructing a weapon of mass destruction in the middle of Sandland. Rao, then known as General Shiva, destroyed the device the Pichi were constructing, triggering an explosion that resulted in the eradication of the Pichi from the face of Sandland. The device, powered by the energy source known as Aquanium, insidiously gifted to the Pichi by the King of Sandland in order to cause the explosion in the first place, was a machine for producing the one resource Sandland and its people had been deprived of by the king: water. The memory of this event, and the reveal by Thief of the device's true purpose to an astonished Rao, reframes the story from a simple little shonen tale to one of loss and regret, revenge and justice, redemption and atonement.
Anyway then, Supreme General Zhu, this guy who lives inside a giant anti-grav ball thing like Baron Harkonnen from Dune, who's revealed as the actual puppet master behind the evil actions of Sandland's army, catches up with Bells and Rao and Thief, who have now realized that the actual source of the king's water is coming from beyond a large dam that was erected to starve out Sandland's main water supply, this big river. He drops this giant lab-grown insect man on our boys, causing causing Bells to go Super Saiyan during his fight with it, beating him up in this cool fight scene, and then General Are, who betrayed the king by giving our boys the location of the dam, shoots Zhu with his cannon and does a salute to Rao, who his dad served under when Rao was Shiva and Shiva was the commander of the tank brigade, and our heroes then shoot a hole in the dam with their tank, and boom, all this water comes out, and the river starts flowing again, and everyone rejoices. But before all of this, before the dam eruption and General RA 360 no-scoping Zhu out of the sky and a little pink angry Goku fighting a nameless bug human being, when our heroes first arrive at the dam, they climb up to the top to see what could possibly be on the other side. And they see this.
A whole world out there to explore, hidden from them, lush and teeming with life the likes of which Sandland has never seen, revealed to us finally at the end of this simple little one-shot. A world that, now that the story's over and our heroes return home, we're simply left to wonder at. And then Sandland ends. 22 years later, on December 8th, 2022, publisher Bandai Namco would tease that Sandland, an obscure, oft-forgotten little one-shot written by Akira Toriyama, would be receiving some kind of continuation, cryptically titled The Sandland Project. By December 17th, 2022, it was announced that the Sandland Project would constitute an all-new film adaptation of the original manga, and an OVA which would feature the world premiere of a brand new story arc written and conceptualized by the master himself, Akira Toriyama. How exciting! Oh, and also there was going to be a tie-in video game. Bandai Namco was going to contract a third-party studio, and they were going to make an obligatory video game also as well.
This video is about that game. Because honestly, I didn't watch the film or the OVA. I couldn't get a hold of them. They're paywalled behind Disney Plus or Hulu or whatever, so I couldn't really find a way to reliably capture footage of them in a way that I thought looked good. And a friend of mine tried to pirate them, but he's dumb as a pile of bricks and couldn't figure out why that wasn't working either, so I didn't really care about those. But what I did care about was this game. Because Sandland, for all its footnote at the bottom of a Wikipedia pagedness, for all its 70-ish out of 100 on Metacriticness, for all its definitely you can tell this game had a low budgetedness, Sandland fascinates me.
Often writing power fantasies that are better experienced than passively consumed, see the growing subset of bodybuilders and powerlifters who rep Goku like he was canonized by the Catholic Church as the patron saint of gains, the experiential nature of Toriyama's work has always lent itself perfectly to the medium of video games. With the release of the Nintendo Famicom in Japan on July 15, 1983, and the beginning of Dragon Ball serialization 1 year later on November 20th, 1984, it would only be 2 short years before Toriyama's art would grace the cover of the genre-defining RPG, Dragon Quest. Released on May 27th, 1986, and Dragon Ball would see its first video game adaptation on the console, with the release of Dragon Ball Shenlong no Nazo a few months later on November 27th, 1986.
From that moment on, Toriyama's contributions to video games would go on to be the stuff of legend. He was a mangaka who helped directly foster not just original work within the medium, but whose successful adaptations of his work would prove just as influential. I could spend all afternoon watching Dragon Ball Z on Toonami, meticulously coloring in the lines of the various Dragon Ball coloring books my mom bought me at a Walgreens somewhere in San Juan, Puerto Rico circa the year 2000, rumpusing around the backyard with my friends with one arm tucked inside my shirt pretending I was Gohan. But the closest I ever felt like I got to the experience of Dragon Ball, of really living Toriyama's work, was playing Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku 2 on my Game Boy Advance, or duking it out with my friends in Dragon Ball Z Budokai, or duking it out with my friends in Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2, or duking it out with my friends in Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3, or Tenkaichi, or Tenkaichi 2, or Tenkaichi 3. You know, it's kinda interesting how almost all of those games I played from my childhood, the Toriyama games that stuck with me, and really the only anime games I ever played, except for Naruto Rise of a Ninja, were all, with the exception of Legacy of Goku 1 and 2, they were all fighting games. Out of the games I've mentioned, Shenlong no Nazo isn't a fighting game. That's more of a top-down adventure game, like Legacy of Goku, and like all those other medium-defining experiences Toriyama helped bring to life. However, taking a look at this list of Dragon Ball video games, what stands out to me is that they're all mostly either fighting games, or, weirdly enough, card battling games. Why is that? If Akira Toriyama had a helping hand in bringing to life the modern console RPG as we know it, if his worlds are these beautiful, cartoonishly vibrant settings full of as much action as they are adventure, slice-of-life comedy, and heartwarming character development, then why are his adapted games that are great, yeah, seminal, sure, award-winning, maybe, why are they always representations of the most simplistic, face-value elements of his work?
All drama, all story, is rooted in conflict. And video games, as inherent to every other storytelling medium, are based in conflict. Violence has always been the video game conflict resolution verb of choice due to its simplistic monkey versus monkey nature, much in the same way that Dragon Ball is also rooted in the age-old tale of monkey versus monkey. But if I just finished saying that Toriyama's work has always been expansive, character-driven, and dramatic in every way a tale can be, then again, why were so many of his games rooted to the genre of fighting games? And don't get me wrong, I fucking love fighting games. The day I discovered video games, the day a controller was first put into my hands by my uncle in his dingy bedroom at my grandparents' house, I played Resident Evil, inappropriate for a 5-year-old, Toy Story 2, perfect for a 5-year-old, and Tekken 3. You know, also perfect for a 5-year-old. Since then, fighting games have always been a part of my life, waxing and waning in my attention as most genres do, but I'm always there for the release of a new Street Fighter or Tekken or whatever ArcSys is cooking up. I'm also not trying to say that fighting games lack drama. If anything, they're one of the most dramatic genres we have in games. Tests of intellect and reflex that pit two real-life combatants in a winner-takes-all contest of pure skill. Fighting games tell stories through play in ways that other genres could only dream of, creating their own heroes, villains, and overarching narratives, but that's not really what I'm talking about. As much as Toriyama's work is a shoo-in for a game that spins out this kind of narrative, there's more to Dragon Ball than the tournament arcs. What I always wanted was a Dragon Ball game, a Toriyama game, an anime video game that let me explore the background of the fighting game stage, that let me hang out with and get to know the characters that lived in these worlds.
As I've grown older, as I've seen more anime and played more games and lived more life and formed more nuanced tastes and opinions, I've come to think less about that feeling of wanting to live a life inside an anime world through video games. Probably because I've learned, as most of y'all already know, that outside of the fighting game and arena-based games I had wanted so badly to break the camera on, there was no other home for anime properties in games. Because anime adaptation games suck. Did they always? Did they have to? What's Sandland? An anime manga adaptation game that was very much not a fighting game. Would it suck? These thoughts, upon first seeing Sandland around spring of 2023, raced through my mind. Here was a game that looked vibrant and fun and sort of cartoonish, like an anime Mad Max video game, and hey, I love Akira Toriyama, surely this would be good, right? Surely this wouldn't suck. As someone who'd gone their whole life craving an experience like this, a fully realized open-world action RPG not just set in the world of an anime or manga I liked, but that would also be a retelling of that cherished original story. Sandland had a lot to deliver if it was ever going to fit my exact mental model of what a game like this should be.
And it starts off quite strong. The game's gorgeous opening moments serving as a perfect retelling of the manga's first few pages. Except now, I was the demon prince Beelzebub stealing water from the king's army with my ragtag band of demon buddies. All of them rendered in this beautiful and, dare I say, perfect 3D cel-shaded style. Yet, beyond these real-grade recreations of what I had already experienced with the manga, lay some unexpected surprises. The first of these surprises came when Sandland, after introducing the main party of 3 and setting them off on their journey to find the Phantom Lake and solve Sandland's water crisis, put me behind the wheel of Sheriff Rao's car. Up to this point, Sandland had controlled about how you would expect any other third-person action platform adventure game to control, with a little bit more of an emphasis on the 3D platformer side of things. Bells' movement feeling deft yet weighty, his jump augmented with the inclusion of the classic double jump. But when I got behind the wheel of that car, what immediately set my brain on fire, and a point we'll belabor significantly a little later, is that while the default control type A placed acceleration of the car unnaturally on the left analog stick so as to allow you to move and shoot comfortably with the right trigger, should one find themselves behind the wheel of a vehicle with a gun emplacement, the optional control type B shifted acceleration to the more natural right trigger, while relocating the shoot button up to the right bumper, requiring that were one to desire to both drive and shoot, they'd have to place their middle and index fingers on the back of the controller in tandem, like this. This moment, this first little trick, stopped me in my tracks. I could see above me in the menu further unique control schemes for Beelzebub and vehicles, for tanks and stuff like that, but the controls for all of them had now been changed to this new control scheme, Control Type B. And I knew I had to see what was going to be up with that tank. The car didn't have a gun, so there was no need for me to employ a more claw-like grip on the controller, and a prior, extremely short tutorialized flashback sequence where you play as Rao as he destroys the Peachy's big machine was nowhere near in depth enough to really get a feel for vehicular combat. So I mean, surely this wasn't that kind of game, surely I wouldn't have to use this slightly more obtuse control scheme, but what if I did? From there, I drove around a little bit. I took in Sandland's gorgeously rendered environments, taking my first real steps in a world I had only previously seen secondhand. I collected some resources I wasn't sure what to do with, marked off a cave I wasn't sure the purpose of other than to get more materials, and I fought some raptors with the game's kind of clumsy, simple combat, and it was there that my worries began to grow. Was this all I had to look forward to? A dull retelling of a story I already knew, augmented only by the inclusion of rote, lukewarmly executed upon open-world video game tropes? No sooner had the question been asked were my worries assuaged, at least when it came to the further intricacies of Sandland's melee combat.
After an encounter with a Geiji dragon, again, perfectly recreated from the manga, the game drops you into its first, extremely clumsy boss fight. And while I was starting to sweat a little, thinking that this was all there was to the game's combat, painfully easy encounters made mind-numbing by just how bare bones the actual fighting mechanics were, it would only take one perk point gained upon leveling up after the fight for that painfully simple combat system to be cracked open like a nut, unlocking a whole smorgasbord of character action-esque situational combo finishers. Now I could almost pull off the kinds of stylish pause combos and juggles you'd see in a Bayonetta or a Devil May Cry, although just a little bit watered down. It was all still sort of easy, but the added option to at least make things a little bit more engaging and interesting pleasantly surprised and intrigued me. I was surprised by the game's possibilities once again. The game's tutorial continued, and with it, these surprises. The game would introduce a new mysterious character. A white woman with dreads, yeah, but a cool Toriyama character design nonetheless. Riding Bulma's exact motorcycle from Dragon Ball on a mysterious quest, the particulars of which I, someone who had not seen the anime, was ignorant of. This was interesting to me for a few reasons. Chief among them, the fact that I was getting an experience with an anime game I had never gotten before. Previously, I had always come to these games, the few that existed that I had played, as a fan of the series that it was adapting, merely reliving events I already knew the structure of, or being spoon-fed irrelevant filler plot lines cooked up exclusively for the game, but now I was along for the ride for the first time, the world and its secrets a fresh experience. From here, the story played out as I knew it to be, although with some extra little fun surprises. The stealing of the tank turning into this long, surprisingly exciting Metal Gear Solid clone stealth sequence through a Royal Army base that was just genuinely really fun and exciting. It was a mandatory stealth sequence in an anime adaptation game, but the satisfying level design and placement of obstacles, cover, and traversal options available to you throughout the base, coupled with the game's stellar controls and animations, meaning that I actually had fun skulking around in what was essentially baby's first Metal Gear, and I mean that as the highest compliment. And then, after all this time, finally, I had made my way to the central image of this artistic work, the thing promised on all the promotional art, the thing I had wondered about since first changing my vehicular control scheme 2 hours prior. The tank. And the tank knocked my socks off.
With controls that forced me to take a more simulationist approach, and combat scenarios that rewarded deft and tactical tank gameplay, to say I was smitten would be an understatement. Here was, all unlocked for me, an experience from Sandland I didn't even know I could ask for. I had expected simple and streamlined tank combat, sure, but to get this, scenario and combat design that highlighted and cartoonified the tactical and mechanical aspects of real tank combat, it was joyous. Cannons and turrets go off with a satisfying oomph, simulated ballistics carving through digital air, the pacing of these engagements requiring you to outplan and outpace your opponents. And then, after the dust on the game's first real boss fight had settled, little collectible pieces strewn across the battlefield, I spied that amongst the wreckage lay a new piece for my tank, salvaged from the debris of my fallen enemy, and a new hope grew within my heart. Was this a mech game?
The game's 3 hours tutorial ends with the cementing of the foundation of what Sandland the video game is, with the party now grown to 3 weird little guys and a lady, with the inclusion of Anne, solidifying this new vision for Sandland. She rounds out the party, introducing a new plot thread that will come to bear later in the story, but also functioning as the party's gearhead, mechanically embodying the gameplay aspect that sets Sandland apart from its source material, allowing you to take that tank that Toriyama drew over 20 years prior and bolt onto it whatever your sick heart desires. With this thread now established, I felt like it was safe to say what Sandland really was. Sandland was a mech game.
From this point, after the stellar opening tutorial hours, after the stunning revelation of Sandland's true genre and gameplay designation, where would it go from here? What would it do with its ergonomically simple melee combat system, or its surprisingly deep vehicle customization, or with this new, mysterious, expansive open-world rendition of the eponymous Sandland? It turns out not much. After you're cut loose in the open world, it's not unfair to say that Sandland starts making a terrible second impression. Faced now with the genre staples of radio towers to unlock, map markers to clear, and side quests to complete, it's easy to see all of what Sandland is doing with these staples of the genre as rote and mechanical. You'll use resources to repair a broken radio tower, revealing on your map the spots of the game's 3 basic locations.
Caves full of item boxes full of resources or new parts for your vehicle, or outcroppings of ore you can crack open for resources to create new parts for your vehicles. Tall cliffs, at the top of which will be more item boxes full of resources or new parts for your vehicles, or even more outcroppings of ore you can crack open for resources you can use to create new parts for your vehicles. Temples. These subterranean labyrinths, remnants of an ancient civilization from a time when demons were the dominant species on the planet, full of ancient boxes which contain ancient coins, which mysteriously are, well, they're just another collectible resource that you use, say it with me,
to create new parts for your vehicles.
Pretty quickly, you come to realize that there's really not much for you to do outside of following the main quest or partaking in the game's side quests, which, at the start of the game, have this sort of worst filler episode of your favorite anime quality that makes actually doing them feel like something only an idiot would do. So you follow the main quest, mess around with some weak side objectives, all of it leading you to the Lisa battleship, the game's first major story dungeon. And between being a little bit wowed by how the extremely rote, rough, and cheap-feeling open world has given way to a considered, directed, and almost reverential interior space, a space where the friction between the new Sandland and the Sandland of old come into stark contrast, there's one moment, one room in this entire dungeon that stuck with me and wouldn't leave my brain for the entirety of my time with Sandland, that would go on to reshape and inform my ability to engage with this game in all of its various highs and lows. It's this. And I knew immediately why this game felt the way it felt. It was Nier. All those seemingly pointless side quests, the sparse, contemplative repetition of its open-world elements, the melee combat, the way the character controller felt, it was all just Nier. And about 2 handfuls of other games that recontextualized the entirety of what I had played so far and what I would continue to play over the course of the game. But looking at that list, I was really only just scratching the surface of what I felt was going on with Sandland.
It's comparatively Spartan game design, a quality that would change as I became more acquainted with the game, and flavorful jank felt like nostalgic qualities. And learning of its developers and their various pedigrees, I took this as the point of reference that would anchor my playthrough. The game had really felt as if some now-aged developers who had produced a series of bangers in the PS2 era and then never touched a video game again, had returned to create their half-overheard interpretation of a modern open-world video game. But if this was a game that shared development pedigree with Nier Automata, then how true could that statement be? Here was a rough, kinda neat and surprising, but ultimately average game, but I couldn't really figure out why it was exactly that it felt so bleh. I know how. I mean, I could point to the strange and ill-considered UI and its weird mirror world logic of having all map locations begin gray and then turn slightly more white after being arrived at but not exactly completed, leading to tedious moments like this one, where I've used Thief's special ability to collect every little piddly resource from these caves that are laid out on the map like a giant bomb of collectibles in a 3D platformer, but because I myself, Beelzebub, Demon Prince of Chaos and Destruction, have not personally crossed the threshold of each cave, their map markers will remain infuriatingly, lay awake at night clutching my head at the thought of leaving any stone unturnedly gray. Or the way your vehicles disappear from the world map after you've walked about 10 feet away from them, requiring you to pull out a capsule to resummon your ride every time you get off of it to explore the aforementioned frustratingly designed map objectives. Or the world map itself, at once fully open to you, but also, in a nod perhaps, to the proliferation and critical exactitude of Metroidvania level and world design, sealed off from you the moment you decide to explore, whether by rock or seemingly impassable hard place, and, to add insult to injury, impossible to keep track of unless you put an unsightly map marker on your map and heads-up display to remind you at all times that in this temple, all the way over here, there's a room you can't enter because you can't jump high enough yet, and you're definitely going to want to come back lest your compulsive 100% completion of this world go unfinished. Or the kind of horrible tutorialization of all these systems and materials and exchange rates, everything in this game feeling nebulous and loose and incoherent.
But still, behind every frustrating moment, behind every missed beat or weird side quest, There's that thing that reminds you one of the freaks who had a hand in Drakengard executive produced this, and you soldier on. And as you keep playing, as you start opening your heart a little bit to this game's weird eccentricities, you suddenly find that all those hours of weird frustration and half-started attempts at having fun have led you to enjoyable, lovingly crafted recreations of all your favorite parts of Sandland. You get to fight General R.A., you get to meet the Peachy, you get to bond with all these cool little freaks. And before you know it, you find yourself headed down to the dam. The end of the road, as far as you know. So you take a step forward and you head towards what you know is the end of Sandland, and everything changes. You cross the threshold. The end of Sandland, the Battle of the Big Dam, is an incredibly realized sequence. I, an idiot, a buffoon, assumed that this was the end of the game, and boy was I shocked to learn that as the situation escalated, as the famous fight with the Mushi Ningen shifted to the plural, as Bells unlocked the ability to spend his darkness meter to enter a devil trigger form, and I realized that the game had only just begun, finally, after all these hours, I was back at the top of the dam gazing out at the rest of the world. Bells going Super Saiyan, while a hype as fuck moment for sure, signals, symbolically, something much deeper. Like Dragon Ball before it, a simple though rudimentary tale unlocked of its full potential by the physical and metaphysical powering up of its lead protagonist, Sandland 2 signals the start of a new, more narratively and mechanically full chapter with this same moment of power escalation. And it was here that I realized what the purpose of Sandland the video game even was, and why I had to find a way to understand every square inch of its design, history, and intention. With Sandland the video game, the full vision of Akira Toriyama's Sandland manga was realized. Sandland the video game is Sandland Z. I think it's important at this point that we take a step back from Sandland and return to the moment when the association with Nier first kicked in, and I delved into the Moby Games page for Sandland and its developers at ILCA.
ILCA is a Japanese game developer you might not be familiar with. Since its founding in October of 2010, they've only fully developed a short list of 6 games.
Pokemon Home for the Nintendo Switch, Android, and iOS released in 2020. The Idolmaster, Starlit Season for Windows PC and PlayStation 4, and Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, remakes of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl for Nintendo Switch, both released in 2021. One Piece Odyssey for Windows PC, PlayStations 4 and 5, Xbox Series X and S, and Nintendo Switch, released in 2023. Sandland for Windows PC, PlayStations 4 and 5, and Xbox Series X and S, released in 2024. And a currently in development Ace Combat game, release date still TBA, although judging by ILCA's track record, perhaps we can expect that out sometime in 2026. This list of 6 games, one still in production, reveals to us so much about ILCA, and in turn, why Sandland is the way that it is. Starting with the 10-year gap between ILCA's founding and their first fully developed title, the question, what was ILCA doing, is raised. The answer, unsurprisingly for a mid-sized AA Japanese game development company, is support work for bigger, more highly budgeted titles like Yakuza 0, Dragon Quest XI, Ace Combat 7, and Nier Automata. The second thing this Wikipedia page reveals to us, along with some sleuthing on Moby Games, is ILCA's pedigree vis-a-vis its founder and CEO Takeya Iwasaki as a studio composed of mostly ex-Kavia developers. This little bit here, this discovery of Takeya Iwasaki, his connection to Kavia, and in turn, ILCA's being a sort of successor studio of Kavia's, was the true piece of the puzzle I had been missing in figuring out how I should approach thinking and talking about Sandland. If you've been living under a rock, and by a rock I mean don't have a weird niche fascination with bizarro mid-tier console games from the 2000s, then perhaps Kavia is not a developer you're familiar with. If you're one of those kinds of people, then I'll say it plainly. They developed Nier. They're where Yoko Taro got his start. And by that I mean they also developed Drakengard. And Drakengard 2, though Taro wasn't super involved with that one. And a bunch of other games I'm about to talk for way too long about for a reason I promise will matter. Kavia went belly up on July 12, 2010. barely 13 weeks before the founding of ILCA by former staff members. Kaguya was known for a lot of games, and we won't have the time to get into all of them, but honing in on Takuya Iwasaki's career as a producer while at Kaguya affords us a curated selection of titles to discuss and mull over a little. But why do this? This is kind of a tedious exercise. I thought this was supposed to be a video about Sandland. What the heck? Settle down, let me explain. If we go back to ILCA's released slate of games, a minor, though not insignificant trait can be teased out with regards to the kind of games Iwasaki, as CEO of ILCA and producer of its games, chose for his new company to develop. And it really probably has to do with his career, his interests, and his scores to settle. Also, I just want to note real quick, this English language Wikipedia page woefully underrepresents the actual breadth of work that ILCA does as a support studio, mostly for Square Enix and Bandai Namco, really doing a lot of work on Yoko Taro's app-based stuff, etc. Listen, my JLPT N5 and 4-ish ass can sort of make sense of their mostly Japanese website, and I have eyes that can just, see all the stuff they've worked on, but from what I can tell, the Wikipedia lists everything they've developed entirely themselves. These are their own, non-support capacity games. Looking over this list of games, we can separate them into 3 distinct categories: hit jobs, anime adaptations, and ace combat. These 3 categories fit neatly into a sort of past, present, and future of ILCA's, and by extension, Iwasaki's ambitions as chief executive of the company. The story starts out modest, with ILCA working hit jobs for Bamco, pushing out 2 products that could loosely be considered games. I'm talking about Pokemon Home and this Idolmaster Starlit Season game here. Projects that paid the bills and helped to establish ILCA's relationship with publisher Bandai Namco, that modest relationship growing to result in the development of a new Ace Combat game under a new Bandai Namco subsidiary named Bandai Namco Aces, headed by ILCA. But in the middle, between the hit jobs that paid the bills and the shiny new future as the stewards of Ace Combat, lie the black sheep of ILCA's portfolio. 2 anime adaptation video games, one of the world's most popular, well, anything, really, and Sandland. Cynically, perhaps even just rationally, one looks at these 2 games and surmises that they were created under the same conditions as the hit jobs, just on a larger scale. And you might be right, if it weren't for all of this development history ending with a new Ace Combat game. Takuya Iwasaki, CEO of ILCA, former producer and developer at Kaguya, former employee of Namco, began his career in 1995 as a planner on Air Combat, the first game in what would become the Ace Combat series, was on the design staff for Ace Combat 2 in 1997, and then worked his first lead role as the project director of Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, before leaving Namco for greener pastures at ILCA, where he helped to develop a lot of games, chief among them, anime adaptations. So we chart then a sort of backwards trajectory for ILCA's development choices, noting how, in a way, each game they pick to work on themselves inversely lines up with the stage in Iwasaki's career. This makes Sandland, and that One Piece game, but this video can't be 1,000 hours long, a sort of atonement-ish return for Iwasaki. A chance to settle the score on his career and his involvement with what is often a heavily maligned and disregarded genre of games. Really a niche in and of itself, the third-person action RPG anime adaptation.
Could we then chart a path that would land us within that desert expanse, and the forest world that awaited beyond its once enclosed borders on more sound footing? Could we, by knowing this man and his career, find ourselves more knowing of what the intent and context of this game that I had kinda not liked was? I started concocting a plan. I started making a list. I'm choosing to omit from this list a few Iwasaki games that I feel are not in the spirit of Sandland. While one could argue that, yeah, Ace Combat 3 could count as a mecha game since the main action performed by the player is piloting a mechanical thing, it just didn't feel right, okay? Just like on a gut check level, I feel like that probably deserves its own video. Resident Evil Dead Aim, also an Iwasaki game, also deserves its own video. I can't play everything. I came to the realization that I had to play all of these games in order to tell this particular story and have even a semblance of authority over what I was saying on, like, the week before Thanksgiving 2024. Hopefully you're watching this video premiere sometime around Christmas 2024, so just, like, do the math on what this entailed for me. The story I am trying to tell charts a direct path from Drakengard, released in Japan on September 11th, 2003, to Sandland, released in Japan on April 25th, 2024, a path that directly addresses each of the reasons why Sandland was so overlooked, why it's the kind of game it is with the sensibilities it has, and will help us begin to form a direct dictionary definition for the modern gamer's definition of a PS2 game. This is the idea. I feel like once we pin each of these points down, we can go back to Sandland and dig a little deeper into what it's doing and why it deserves more than what it got. So join me as we explore the strange, fascinating link between Bandai Namco Entertainment, Square Enix, and all-time cult classic developer Kavia, all through the lens of the career of one obscure, oft-overlooked yet terrifically prolific developer, Takuya Iwasaki. Game number 1, Drakengard, developed by Kavia and released on September 11th, 2003. Look, let me level with you. As the kind of person who would make a video like this, telling you that I only played Drakengard, a game about a medieval warrior who makes a pact with a dragon to stop an evil empire, whose final level features said warrior atop the aforementioned dragon blazing through the skies above a modern skyscrapered hell city, en route to kill a giant evil little boy, and that upon completion of this first of several extra endings, I promptly stepped away without another peek into its 30-ish more hours of optional content, brings me a kind of shame I've truly never experienced before. I had to put it down. I had to. Like a black hole, I am compelled by forces beyond my reckoning towards its center, perhaps one day to be pulled so close as to never escape. If the goal for this section is less a deep dive on each of these games than a cursory look at them, seeing under what conditions they might have been produced and what elements of their design and production would be carried on through the generations to eventually culminate in Sandland, then for now, I must step carefully away from Drakengard. But as I back away slowly, let me at least say a few words about what I experienced and how it all related to what we're getting at here. Stemming from an original idea between Takuya Iwasaki and Takamasa Shiba, Drakengard's producers, about a medieval air combat game featuring a dragon instead of a jet fighter, only further and sickified by up-and-coming writer Yoko Taro, Drakengard is about the coziest nightmare one could possibly imagine, splitting gameplay between on-foot, Musou-style missions where the player mashes square until it's time for them to mash triangle, raking up a genocidal kill count meant to satiate the appetite of a sadistically large number of power-upable weapons, and air combat missions on the back of a dragon that are, while more polished, still just as sadistically designed. Drakengard is a hateful, bad video game that's impossible not to love. You'll go from thinking that people bemoaning the game's on-foot combat must be suffering from some kind of skill issue, to smashing your head against a wall after losing about 30 minutes worth of progress, all of it mind-numbing, to an enemy type designed to be fought by a different video game's main character, all of it mediated by a third-person camera that definitely wants to see you eat shit, but that's just the Drakengard experience, baby! Much has already been said about this game's player hatred, its weaponized game design an instrument of a maniacal masked man with a point to prove, so I won't say anything more about that. What I will say, still slowly backing away from it, its teeth bared, a glint in its eye daring me to take another step closer, is that Drakengard, though not an anime game, and that Sandland, though not a Nier game, do share a link, but that necessitating a full discussion of Drakengard before dissecting Sandland would be like not being able to describe the experience of eating at a Nashville hot chicken sandwich joint without first digressing on how dinosaurs were actually once covered in feathers. You press square a lot. Sometimes you press triangle for a combo ender. The game seems like it might not be all that good, but actually carries within it a vector for appreciation and enjoyment. It features a pilotable thing, the perspective changes highlighting the artifice and intentionality of it all. They were produced by the same person. I step away now, Maybe one day I'll come back with a stick. Game number 2. Full Metal Alchemist and the Broken Angel, developed by Rockgene, and released on December 25th, 2003. Alright, full disclosure, this is not a Takeya Iwasaki or Kaguya joint, although it does establish a secondary line of influence over the PS2 anime game to Sandland Pipeline, a useful framework for understanding the third-person anime action RPG as it delineates from the more common anime tie-in fighting game. As a dyed-in-the-wool anime normie, I can pretty confidently say that Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is my favorite anime of all time. It's not, it's Monster, I mean, come on. So I went into this game with high hopes. Here's a series that I not only love, but that features perhaps the best world out of all the popular turn of the millennium shonen to adapt into an RPG. It's got a simple to understand but lore-dense magic system that can be applied by its wielders in a variety of RPG class-like ways, a vibrant and cozy early 20th century world popular amongst RPGs of the early PS2 era to explore, and a whole party's worth of lovable, iconic characters to level up and hang out with. It's with this game, though, that a line is drawn in the sand, and a different path is chosen for this type of game. Instead of a Final Fantasy-like, or even a Mana-like, a Zelda-like, a Lundra-like, what we get instead is a sort of level-based beat-em-up with some extremely light RPG elements, and a sprinkling of character action flavor, and by flavor I mean you have to remember how many times to mash square before it's time to mash triangle. It's Drakengard, but with less enemies. It's a single-player only Smash Bros. Game where items are equivalently exchanged out of barrels and poles and other stage decorations. It's a visual novel that's not very good. This is what anime games will be for the foreseeable future. It's boring, heartbreakingly written by Hiromu Arakawa herself filler that serves to dangle a carrot in front of you that you don't really need to eat and are better off just looking at instead. It wins itself a lot of points on the simple charm of, wow, I'm Edward Elric, and oh, I can transmute this metal thing into a cannon? Wowee! At first, and then proceeds to ape you into the same response as it repeats the same scenarios in different locales over the course of its impossibly long 8-ish hour runtime. Like, the entire middle section of the game is the same level repeated twice, except the first time you fight these 3 alchemists in their living armor in one of the most broken, annoying boss fights I've ever had the displeasure of playing, and then the second time you do it all over again, except there's 5 living armors this time. It's a paint-by-numbers action game with just enough novelty and charm for it to be all the more disappointing. And it heralds a trend that would be easy to rag on for the preceding, well, however long this segment is, if it weren't for that same novelty and charm. I mean, there's a section late into the game where Ed starts transmuting tanks. My pattern recognition's fucked. I see shit like this and my brain lights up like a Christmas tree. Full Metal Alchemist and the Broken Angel is not a good game, but its lead developer, Isao Muto, and his team at Rockgene would go on to work alongside Kaguya a little later down the line, continuing this tale of anime game adaptations that will, eventually, see us back to Sandland. But if the quality of this game is indicative of anything, let it be indicative not of the craft of its developers or their passion for the work they were doing, but the commercial constraints embedded into the fabric of the work itself. As far as I can tell, Full Metal Alchemist and the Broken Angel was afforded the at the time unheard of luxury of having more than a year of development time, according to its producer Tomoya Asano. This luxury would not be afforded to some of the other games on this list, but to consider it a luxury in the first place is something that, even for the time, seems ludicrous. Games these days take developers 4 years to produce if they're extraordinarily lucky, so the thought of having slightly more than a year to develop a game and considering yourself lucky paints an immediate picture of what the landscape of licensed anime games looked like. A landscape we'll continue to explore. Game number 3, Ghost in the Shell, standalone complex, developed by Kaguya and released on March 4th, 2004. Released by Kaguya barely a year after Drakengard, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex for the PS2 is a small miracle of a video game. I was at first wowed by its straightforward aiming and shooting, only to be immediately let down by its bizarre insistence on horrible platforming, and then roped back in by, well, just how good of a game it actually all is. Did it win awards with critics? Is it fondly remembered by more than a minuscule niche of gamers? Is it more than a breezy evening jaunt through a familiar, oppressive cyberpunk world? Well, no, not really. But it's in the execution that we see something of caveat that stuck with me when it comes to talking and thinking about these licensed games. Genuine love for and understanding of the source material they're adapting. Production IG's anime, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, compared to the 1995 Mamoru Oishii film, Ghost in the Shell, has a decidedly more Y2K, utopian near-future aesthetic. The dark undercurrent of the cyberpunk genre is updated to fit the times, more virtual light than Neuromancer, and the game lavishes in that cold, clean, almost pastel futurism. Scenes of antiseptic blue light reflecting against gray-green concrete, or a washed-out, desolate cityscape at sunset, or fields of rice as far as the eye can see, rendered in stunning detail. The vibe accentuated by just how lonely the game's dual protagonists, the Major and Bato, feel against these environments. Levels that are at once both hostile to your presence, micro-labyrinths of concrete and plastic and exposed wiring chocked to the brim with disposable grunts for you to blast through, and demanding of your stopping to appreciate a calm, quiet, nearly reverential moment within an abandoned parking lot at dusk. It's cozy. It's nostalgic, the soundtrack looping its hypnotic minimalist breakcore while you gun down hundreds of nameless mooks as your brain blissfully tunes it all out. It's good. If you've got a free afternoon with nothing to do, then give it a shot. But it was heartening seeing that with Kaguya's first anime adaptation, they took the time to do something that honors and aligns with the tone and pacing of the source material so elegantly, instead of simply adding a model of the main character to a generic third-person shooter character controller and more or less calling it a day. Game number 4, Full Metal Alchemist 2. Curse of the Crimson Elixir, developed by Rockgene and released on September 22nd, 2004. If playing through these Rockgene games, led by Isao Muto before his work with Kaguya, Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 1 and 2 has taught me anything, it's that perhaps I should be tempering expectations. The folks at Rockgene had less than a year to develop this after the release of the first FMA game, and it so painfully shows. The game starts out strong, the newly cel-shaded aesthetic signaling that steps have been taken to really make this an improvement over the original, and the signs don't stop there. The combat feels more impactful and fluid. Combos between Ed's fists, his transmuted blade arm, and alchemy flowing seamlessly out of the same basic strings, all of this augmented by the new alchemy system where transmuted weapons that further switch of Ed's combat can be transmuted at any time once you've unlocked them through the story. The environmental alchemy as well is more refined, increasing the wackiness of the items you can make while also continuing to streamline their effectiveness and ease of use. It felt immediately better. It looked better, I was happy to see where its story was going, even though hearing a retelling of the Lior chapters of FMA affects me the same way as taking a handful of Benadryl, and then the game just takes a nosedive in terms of quality that barely 4 hours in made me call it quits, despite also not finishing the first game. Fullmetal Alchemist means so much to me. I've been a fan since I had it scare the crap out of me upon first seeing it on Adult Swim at around age 8 or 9, ingraining that 2003 original anime, but for all its faults, as a foundational moment for my love of animation. 2011's Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood is one of my favorite shows of all time. I've watched it countless times with my younger brother. The bond that Ed and Al share always being really special to me for this reason. I've drawn shitty fan art of the characters the world will never see. All of this to say, I love Fullmetal Alchemist. So when I say that this game felt just a little bit offensive to me, know what it takes for me to say something like that. The gameplay I praised earlier, though superficially better, still suffers from the same fundamental issues as are felt in the first game. Combo strings weirdly lock Ed into continuing to attack in the direction he's facing. There's very little, if any, hit stop, invulnerable knockdown states for enemies kill the flow of combat, and enemies find their only strength in numbers. These levels that these encounters take place in being these empty, repetitive gauntlets of enemies you can either run through at the risk of falling behind the game's level curve, or dutifully clock in for your job as the Full Metal Alchemist and strap in for a third-person action RPG that feels about as fun as filling out paperwork. The plot as well is more interested in just blandly regurgitating the plot of the anime back to its fanbase, rather than actually doing something with that story that would be fun or interesting as a game. Whole chapters and scenes being ripped straight from the anime in the form of these interminable dialogue sequences, but unfortunately, when the game does decide to indulge in its own original content, it's either clumsily shoehorned into the already set-in-stone plot of the original that it's regurgitating, or doled out in these excessively frequent vignettes between characters that, while funny at first, are so frequent they instantly meld in with the rest of the game's tedium, and look, if it sounds like I'm being harsh, it's because fans of anime like FMA and the developers who work on these games just fucking deserve better than this. Overworked devs working under insane deadlines, no matter how talented, aren't going to produce their best work, and thinking that anime fans will just slop it all up anyway, netting a profit for the IP holders, is short-sighted. Full Metal Alchemist 2 is not a game that is remembered in any kind of light. If anything, maybe the die-hardest of hardcore fans might find something here, but even they, like me, will probably put it away after a few hours, and that's just so sad. FMA is a near perfect property for a game like this. You can see that the developers at Rockg know this. You can feel them grasping at ideas that, given a realistic development timeline, could have produced a classic, but there are quotas to meet, quarterly figures to uphold, and they were given a measly 9 months to make something. And what they made was a pretty alright prototype for a sequel to a kind of bad but promising game. Game number 5 and game number 6, Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles, developed by Kaguya and released on August 18th, 2005, and Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2, developed by Kaguya and released on November 16th, 2006. After Full Metal Alchemist 2, my will to go on with this bit wavered significantly. So much so that, upon booting up the next game in this genealogical tree, Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles, the first joint production between Kaguya and Rockg, the first collaborative project between Takuya Iwasaki and Isao Muto, and seeing its rather interesting combat system, a further evolution of this arcadey character action-esque beat-em-up light thread we've been chasing since FMA 1, and to some extent Drakengard, and its gorgeous graphics, be immediately hampered by a lackluster, boring, padded-to-hell story about Naruto going on tedious missions to fetch cats and rescue shop owners or whatever, all of it mediated through this terminal, Candyland-ass, board game-ass overworld map with random encounters separated from the rest of the game via glacial PS2 load screen. Well, I just kind of gave up. I wrote the majority of the script, called it quits on the whole endeavor of getting through all these games, whatever I did need to get from them having been already gotten, but out of curiosity, a few weeks later, I booted up Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2 to at least capture a few minutes of B-roll, and what I got was a surprise I was not expecting. Continuing with this exercise in full and finishing this video in a timely fashion seem to be mutually exclusive endeavors, so I will not be tracing a full lineage here. Through Bullet Witch, into Nier, then Drakengard 3, in Nier Automata, and then culminating in Sandland, for that way lies madness. So many of the games I've played so far, while educational in their mechanics and inspiring of a certain narrative in their production history, have been sorry, boring excuses for actual entertainment. So imagine my relief when I realized that Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2 was not only a good game, good enough for me to consider finishing it, I didn't finish it, but also a perfect example of the creative and market forces that shaped what the anime game even was until very recently. Kinda feels like really until Sandland. If Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles was a sort of annoying reminder of the worst qualities possessed by these games, then Uzumaki Chronicles 2 feels like a heartfelt apology. Quick, efficient, to-the-point storytelling, the main plot an episodic, fillerless, feature film-length tale about a clan of puppet master ninjas out for revenge. It's cool. It really feels like the script for a Naruto movie we never got, and it was interesting enough to hold my attention and keep me playing over the course of a single long sitting. I did not end up beating this game. The Super Mario 3 world map is back, but now you just use it to get from point A to B, with random encounters doled out between points on the map at a rate of around 3 or 4 encounters per mission, padding out the length of each of the game's 10 story missions to a familiar 30-ish minutes. Each of these missions terminating in a fun, blissfully short set-piece gauntlet of fully voice-acted and animated cutscenes, light platforming and exploration, some puzzle solving on occasion, and the requisite combat encounters. And the combat, really the best part of both this and Uzumaki Chronicles 1, is lean, straightforward, a little janky and non-specific but not in a bad way, the ability to switch between your favorite teenage ninjas the way Dante switches between weapons, keeping things fresh and almost a little competitive. XP being doled out by enemies in the form of little collectible orbs that only one of your 3 little buddies will be able to pick up. So you play through these 15 to 30 minute little levels, beat up some cool thugs and puppets, hang out with your favorite Naruto characters, watch some mildly entertaining cutscenes, level up your characters, and engage with the cool skill chip system, and suddenly, before you know it, you finished most of the game in one sitting. You weren't ever annoyed or frustrated or bored, and even when you were bored, it was a good bored, a meditative bored, a cozy, comfy, watching reruns of your favorite shonen anime on a cloudy day while sick in bed bored. Perhaps this was the zone that all these previous games have been striving for. A sort of liminal zone, in between gleeful entertainment and anxious boredom, where the frontal lobe is subsumed by familiar characters and locations. Stories and scenarios that, while not totally free of conflict, are coated in comfortable trappings that suggest immediately that, hey, if you want to put your feet up on the table, then go for it. With Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2, the inherently filler-esque nature of these games and their plots is laid bare. A necessity, surely, of the production constraints these games were made under, the logistics of a Naruto game in 2005 inhibiting a perfect video game open-world retelling of the Chunin exam arc and the Sasuke retrieval arc, but allowing for a short, hit all the required Naruto beats Naruto romp, and while it did actually kind of fizzle out for me towards the end of my 5 hours with it, I feel like if I had rented this at Blockbuster or bought it for $5 after trading in some of my other already completed PS2 games for it circa 2006, then I probably would have gotten my money's worth. If cynical money-grubbing and value propositions are what led to the fall of each of the previous games on this list, then finally, with Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2, Iwasaki and his teams were able to make something inspired and joyous, though still a little short off the mark. It would be nearly 20 years before they'd hit on target for this exact type of game, and thank God they did. Having come all this way to ultimately succumb under the weight of these games, I think I understand now why so many of them have such malign reputations. Their stories are a painful drip feed of slop not even the most dedicated diehard of fans could appreciate, and while the gameplay systems do become more refined and interesting as the games go on, these systems are constrained to only the most bare bones of environments. There's just so little here for players to touch, to explore, to experience. The gameplay sections generally shuttling you between one nails on a chalkboard story sequence and the next. All commercial art exists, at the end of the day, to take your money, but never has this truth been laid more bare. These aren't so much games as they are playable commercials for the properties they represent, and not very good ones at that. But these elements are all signs of developers being forced to work within extreme constraints placed upon them by publishers and IP holders. In the span of 3 years, from 2003 to 2006, Takuya Iwasaki, Isao Muto, and handfuls of others at Rakjin and Kavia put out 5 full-length video games. The ordeal of creating these games, presumably under the intense scrutiny of said IP holders, is unimaginable. It's then, through this lens, that we can see where the cracks start to appear on the surface of these games, and we can see within the shining light of actual passionate creative ideas. If we gleaned anything from this experimental foray into the depths of anime adaptations gone by, other than claiming that anime adaptations have come a long way, then wait, have they? Have they really? Honestly, the only anime game I've played in the past, like 15 years, holy shit, is Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm 4 at my buddy's student housing apartment high as hell like 8 years ago? And that's an arena fighter, and we're not including those in this discussion. Those are a completely different genre thing altogether, so I guess I haven't really played an anime game in like a proper anime action RPG since maybe Naruto Rise of a Ninja. I mean, I obviously took a look at Dragon Ball Z Kakarot while researching this video, and honestly, I mean, it was cool, but it seemed randomly designed and inelegant in the same ways as all the PS2 games I played, just bigger and more polished. A cool game for a fan of the series, but not really much more than that for a wider audience. So I guess then, we really can't say that anime adaptation games have come a long way since the PS2. These are still maligned, inelegant games, stuffed to the gills with all these sort of half-baked ideas in the hopes, seemingly, of hitting some quotient that'll promote their status from interactive advertisement to real-life video game. There's more passion here now, more money being thrown at developers to flesh these games out, but the core remains the same. Unless you're already a fan of the source material, then really, there's nothing here for you that couldn't be better experienced somewhere else. And this is what makes Sandland such an anomaly, yet at the same time, the rightful heir and successor to what these games have always, and still continue to be. Sandland, outside of its being something farted out by a master artisan over 20 years ago, isn't really its own property. I'm sure there are Sandland fans out there, but it's not its own thing in the way that Fullmetal Alchemist or Naruto or One Piece or Attack on Titan or Dragon Ball are, and it never will be. But perhaps that's the key to the reason it succeeds so much as a video game. So far, every game I played has been hampered by the expectation of what a insert this popular anime property video game should be. Fullmetal Alchemist needs to have some kind of action combat, the characters on that show do alchemy, so maybe items in the world should be transformable, and well, then there's the rest of the story with its comedy and political intrigue and occult horror, and well, if you're making a game on the PS2, just what do you do with that? I guess you make a bunch of fully voiced, unskippable cutscenes that rehash basically the same plot as the anime. The same with Naruto. Naruto's about people beating each other up, so we gotta have some of that, and ninjutsu's just magic, so give everyone a few one-button specials to pepper into the same square, 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 triangle combo strings, and they go out on missions ranked D through S in Universe, so there's your level progression structure right there. Or Ghost in the Shell. Oh, wait, you know, actually, making a lean, mean, 5-hour third-person shooter with an unobtrusive narrative is always a surefire way to have a good time, so that one actually gets a pass. All of this to say, we know what we should expect from a game like this. And it's that straightforward, cut and dry, milquetoast expectation that keeps these games down. I quit out of most of these less out of frustration, less out of a real time commitment issue, and most of these games being sub 10-hour experiences for the story mode, but because I just got bored. Like really, really, really bored. I knew what to expect from each game, could predict the exact bits they'd lean on, could intuit their combat systems on first blush. They just never made me guess what was next or surprised me in any meaningful way. But that's where Sandland's strengths lie. It's a 14-chapter manga with very little in the way of complex plot or world building or characterization, but there's just enough there that if a development team led by a seasoned veteran developer with a bone to pick was given a decent-sized budget by a major publisher to simply make a modern video game, well, they could kinda just fucking run with it, cramming the game with lessons learned over the course of 20 years of trying and failing to make an exact game like this. Anime games kinda suck, but they were always developed by talented, passionate developers with pedigrees and now legendary rap sheets that touch upon some of the best, worst, and most genre-defining games. And Sandland, finally, is a culmination of all that work, indebted to and made weirder by its blood ties. Before working on Drakengard, Iwasaki worked on Air Combat and Ace Combat 2, eventually serving as the project leader on Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere. a game that would then inadvertently go on to inform and form the basis of the dragon combat in Drakengard. His career then spent working on anime game after anime game after anime game, slowly over time honing his craft as a producer and developer, leading small teams working under impossible deadlines to meet the demands of colossal IP owners and fans alike. And while these games weren't exactly hits, they each served to further hone and refine the platonic ideal of a mid to low budget action-adventure RPG, each game adding new mechanics while refining old ones, trying new systems and styles of narrative and mechanical presentation, edging closer and closer to an ideal anime video game that, due mostly to microscopic development times and budgets, would always be just out of reach. Iwasaki, blessedly, was able to abandon this yearly grind when, after Cavia finished providing production support for Metal Gear Solid 4, he took a 2-month break during which we can assume that the original Nier first came into being. Here was a game that fulfilled the mechanical dream of all the anime games that came before it, yet under the guise of a new IP. I did not play Nier for this video. I couldn't do it. I barely made it out of Drakengard with 10 hours played and a dark urge to indulge in more, and as someone who wants to keep doing whatever this is for the foreseeable future, I cannot let myself go further down this road. I cannot lose sight of the goal here. Suffice to say that, given the astronomical impact of Nier and its growing worldwide success, with sequels and remakes and mobile games and stage plays, it's a miracle that Iwasaki, now the head of his own studio, Ilka, would choose to take all of that experience, an entire decade of honing and refining the anime game, another decade of helping to shepherd one of the most exciting action RPG series to ever release, and pour all of that knowledge and craft into an adaptation of an obscure Akira Toriyama one-shot, 20 years forgotten. In the time since Toriyama sat down to draw a tank, Takuya Iwasaki and the developers at Ilka set about to do their best in turning the dreams of anime fans everywhere into reality. To create a video game adaptation, if under contract, is still a labor of love. You don't put out a game every year for nearly 10 years unless you love and believe in what you're doing. You don't recruit the guy who designed the Full Metal Alchemist games for Rock Gene and Square, Isao Muto, games that, while not good, show promise and an understanding of how the two mediums could be joined to work on your upcoming under-contract Naruto game, unless you yourself have a love and understanding of the source material you're adapting. Originally, over the course of this section, I said I was going to try and establish a foundation for understanding the anime game, and then spin that off into establishing a dictionary definition for what gamers mean when they call a modern video game a PS2 game. As in, this looks like a PS2 game, or this is giving PS2 vibes. Comments I had seen levied at Sandland and other modern mid-budget games like it, but now that feels kinda disrespectful to the work that was done here. Not that PS2 games are worse somehow than what we have now, or that we can't look back on them fondly, studying them with the same vigor and level of critique we might a modern release, but in that, with Sandland, we have a game that could only come about as a direct result of hard, grueling, iterative work, starting with the PS2, and culminating here, in 2024, on a vibrant, lovingly constructed modern video game. A game whose DNA is awash with insights on game design gained only by working on the PS2. If it might seem to you like Sandland has PS2 vibes, you'd be correct in saying that in the same way that you could say that I have my mom and dad vibes, but simply reducing me to being just like them would be a disservice to me and the things I've accomplished, and to them and all the work they did to raise me. Gaming culture, as a whole, has a strange relationship with the past. We either look back on games of old and stare gawkingly at their less than refined mechanics and lower polygonal content, hypothetically asking how anyone could possibly have enjoyed those games, sometimes going as far as to wield the name of an older console as a pejorative term for a new game that might look a little rough around the edges. Or we uphold old games as these somehow more real, more inspired, more artistically sound creations, championing games now 20, 30, even 40 years old as somehow better than anything we have today. Maybe it's because as a medium we're still so young, still reflexively looking back at the past as either a barbaric or halcyon age, but to the people who make these games, who shape our industry, their way goes only forwards. Not that old games shouldn't be remembered fondly, or preserved for future generations to relish and fall in love with and learn from as we did, but the march of progress ticks ever onwards. For the developers of Sandland, their journeys might have started around the time of the original PlayStation, but with each game being an improvement on the games that came before, an embrace of new times, new hardware, and new properties, why should we attribute what belongs to the eternal spirit of its developers to something as temporal as a console they might have made a game on 20 years ago? If Sandland seems to you like a PS2 game, if its mechanics and narrative structure and world design reminds you of times gone by, consider it a whisper on the wind. Listen to it while it lingers, and then move forward.
And now for a short interruption on the history of Mecha.
You know, maybe it was Mitsutaro Yokoyama that started it all. Tatsujin 28 Go, Giant Robo, all classics, immediately enmeshing the thought of a human little guy piloting a mechanical big guy as something really sick in the collective unconscious. But it would take until 1972 for Go Nagai to have the brilliant idea to put the little guy inside of the robot in his seminal series Mazinger Z. From there, things get heavy. Fast forward to 1979, the year Yoshiyuki Tomino creates the TV animated series Mobile Suit Gundam, bringing life back into a genre that had gotten stale riding off the super robot coattails of Mazinger. Tomino stressing the use of robots as tools in the telling of a sprawling, operatic, distinctly humanist story. While not a smash hit at first, Gundam goes on to become one of the most enduring, celebrated works not just of mecha anime, but of the medium of animation at large, solidifying the mecha not just within the context of Japanese cultural consciousness, but world consciousness at large. And from there, you get your Macrosses and Patlabors and Evangelions, and a whole slew of mecha video games doing their own thing with the genre and its interactive potential, putting players both in the cockpit of their favorite mechs, and allowing them the opportunity to model and kit bash them together to their heart's content. But amidst it all, and running from the original source as, we have Toriyama's history as an absolute mechanical design freak. Now, this is just a short, cool little couple hundred or so words on it all. If you want a more in-depth look at Toriyama's designs, their inspirations, and his known love of model kit building, check out Zimmerit's excellent deep dive into the subject matter, Akira Toriyama's mechanical designs, Dragon Ball and Sandland creators' underappreciated machines, and the associated article, links in the description. So, all I'll say is that taking Toriyama's rich history of mechanical designs, and using that as the basis from which you expand Sandland and mesh it within the rich history of mecha proper is a genius enough idea to denote Sandland the video game status as an all-time thing you should check out. Taking a title that put Toriyama's love of cool, chunky, tactile mechanics at the forefront, and extrapolating from it an opportunity to celebrate an entire career's worth of cool mechs, Sandland's menagerie of cars and bikes and tanks and robots of all shapes and sizes ripped straight from Toriyama's catalog of iconic hard surface designs. Each one, from the customizable fenders and gun placements, to the decals and custom paint jobs, a loving homage to everything a 20th century kid would doodle in the margins of a school notebook. It's a celebration and exaltation of the model kit building and collecting process, exemplified through the mecha game subgenre, a touching eulogy to an underappreciated facet of a legendary creator's boundless interest in the world around him.
We return, finally, to Sandland. After the revelatory moment of figuring out what this game was and the kind of experience it seems to be aiming for, we're left now with the hard work of actually talking directly about this game and what it's doing. So much of my preconceived notions about what this game would be were blown out of the water, first with the mechanical depth of the tank, then with the revelation of the game's pedigree, that it makes talking about what this game does a more difficult subject to broach. I want to get this right. I owe it to you. The best way to do it then, it seems to me, is to focus on understanding Sandland's at first seemingly flawed gameplay loop. In the previous segment, I talked a little bit about how with Naruto Uzumaki Chronicles 2, we can see the beginnings of the intended, sort of brainless, comforting experiences these games have always been trying to achieve. And with Sandland, and its open world replete with points of interest, harvestable resources, openable loot boxes, optional boss fights, side quests, and hidden, ultra-powered parts for your mech, this design ethos achieves its final form. The world of Sandland is a bit of a dull laundry list of objectives, but it's the mech and how it changes the way the player relates to that seemingly dull laundry list of objectives and the world around them that Sandland's gameplay loop revolves around. As we've already established, the mech is as essential to understanding Toriyama's work as our spiky hair, big muscles, and overt otaku perversion. And the Out for Blood team at Ilka, geniuses for capitalizing on this aspect of Sandland and Toriyama's work, just go fucking nuts with it.
It's at this point, after the dam-busting sequence and the end of the game's retelling of the original manga, that Sandland begins to open up. The once barren land, full of zones separated by vast, impassable chasms, now finds those chasms the channels where the water we've quested for runs. The plot too opens up, our protagonists needing to venture forth to the heretofore unseen forest land for plot reasons, but in order to get there, they first need to construct a mech capable of traversing the flooded waterway that connects the two lands. With the construction of this hovercar and its overwater traversal unlocked, we're finally given the chance to see how Sandland's world, now free from barriers and restrictions, is meant to be engaged with. But this choice of having the open world be mediated by the abilities of Beelzebub's mechs was already something the game had been playing with. The game begins with the unlocking of the tank, but it's not long after Bells and crew get the tank that they're given the game's second mech, the Jump Bot. Capable of, well, jumping up high cliffs where extra resources are hidden, those jumpy legs also lending increased mobility in combat and furnishing it with a machine gun and grenade launcher combo that capitalizes on its ability to just jump around like a menace. It's even got a ground pound. This rudimentary stable of a tank and a simple bipedal turret soon grows into a menagerie of different toys, each with their own unique application to the challenges propped up by the game. You've got the buggy and the motorbike for blazing through long distances, the jump bot and the more agile and better hopper, the car sucks, and many, many more that become unlockable once Bells and crew make the journey to the distant forest land.
The mechs augment the way you interface with the structure of the open world, revealing that there are less barriers to your traversal than you might think. Take the lowly jump bot, capable of turning what seems like your bog-standard video game desert segmented by tall cliffs, into the Super Mario Bros. Version of riding your horse up a cliff in Oblivion, or the ways in which speedier vehicles are necessary when it comes to jumping over gaps and traversing quicksand before being sucked in, or how the tank cannon can be used to blow up tough rocks. The mechs in this game serve not just as weapons, but, as Yoshiyuki Tomino intended for Gundam to illustrate, as tools just like any other. This is the beauty and versatility of the mech. In other games, the means by which the player is meant to traverse and interact with the world, which is to say, the way they're meant to cross things off a list and make numbers go up, is abstracted by the fantasy of the story and world they're playing within. You might be a planet-saving hero fighting monsters and unlocking radio towers, or a samurai riding your horse, the cool evening breeze guiding you to your next objective, but those are all abstractions sitting on top of the cold, rote, mechanical heart of video games. The mech too is an abstraction. You're still interacting with something that isn't real, but in highlighting the mechanical and utilitarian function of the mech, we build a bridge between what we're doing as players, pressing buttons and moving little sticks and levers, and what the character in the game is doing, pressing buttons and moving little sticks and levers. The mech then might just be, in the way real racers train using iRacing, the perfect mechanical simulation. Perhaps being a pilot of some kind is the perfect video game mechanic, regardless of the game, but I digress. But then, In a masterstroke of design, the game forces you to whittle down your choice of vehicle from the total pool of 13 to just 5 different mechs you can take out with you into the field. This forces you to pick and choose preferences, honing in your preferred way to interface with and traverse the game's world. Here are my favorites, but I have to add a quick stipulation. An explanation of my playstyle, my modus operandi when it comes to clearing the map and meeting its wide variety of challenges. If you give me the opportunity in a game to mechanically min-max my experience, to tune into the fine grain of a game's button presses and UI timings, to hone my craft at playing a game with skill, speed, and style, then I'll jump on that opportunity like the action game sicko I am. So when given a large open world map with collectible objectives, studded with enemies like breadcrumbs on a trail of smoke-tinged, oil-stained mechanical violence, and a suite of customizable, mechanically distinct vehicles with which to see it all, then it becomes my goal to sail through that world as deftly and murderously as possible. A little pink John Wick atop a 500cc engine grafted with weapons. I like crossing the map quickly, methodically marking each point of interest with a numbered marker, letting my brain turn off as pure animal instinct takes over. So when it comes to the mechs I like to keep around at all times, here are my favorites, and how they allow me to have the best time possible for me.
At no point in the game can you get rid of the tank. Well, maybe you can. That actually remains to be seen because, dear viewer, I actually still haven't finished this game. There's still stuff I haven't done. I'm still playing it. Give me a break. But the tank is the force staple of the game for a reason. In most games, a tank is a tank. A slow-moving, heavily defensive piece of mobile artillery, but not so here. The tank is the jack of all trades, the blank canvas upon which you can paint your wildest mechanical desires. Want a fast tank with the ability to deploy an autonomous circus of missiles? Or a lumbering, slow-shooting tank capable of bolting itself to the earth, its slow-shooting, high-damage cannon turned into a machine gun of explosives? All of these choices and more are available to you with the tank. Is it my favorite? Not really, but its versatility and utility keep it on rotation even outside of when the developers insist I use it. There's a charm to the buggy. Not as fast as the motorbike, a little more maneuverable, its mounted swiveling cannon and stationary front-mounted machine guns recalling a different game. A game I played a lot as a child, a game I loved, an old game from a prestige developer that hasn't really been matched since. Weird. Well anyway, there's nothing quite like doing donuts around a pack of giant scorpions, all the while lobbing missiles at them. Also, it's got a cool face. So earlier, we talked a bit about how, with the hover car, Sandland opens up, and we're able to traverse over the rivers and swamps that made some of the late-game zones inaccessible. And there are real reasons, beyond the high-level mobs, you'd want to come to these zones. A lot of late-game bounties hide in these zones, not to mention a cavalcade of high-end crafting resources you'll need to keep your mechs up to snuff if you're gonna even think about tackling those late-game bounties. Bounties that, earlier in the game, might have given you some cash and maybe a blueprint for new parts for the tank or the jump bot, but that now give you frames to craft brand new, elusive, secretive, highly desirable mechs. All of this to say, the hover car changes the game. Too bad it sucks! So instead, we take with us the hoverjet. Here's why. Okay, let's get real. This whole time I've been talking about mechs. You've probably been thinking to yourself, gee, this guy's really stretching the definition of mech, haven't you? You've heard me use the term vehicle and mech and robot interchangeably, getting your responses ready, grinding your axe, getting ready to tell me that I really shouldn't be using the term mech to describe utilitarian vehicles. A mech, you might be thinking, is one of these guys. A bipedal robot with arms and a head. A Daitatsujin of some sort, our little pink prince of destruction nestled cozily within. A mech is a metal man. But what is a man? Is a man not just a means to an end? Are we not all reducible to our basest, most practical qualities? A man could be a car, shuttling passengers from place to place. A man can walk and jump and stomp. A man can be a tank, destructive, defensive, determined, facing ever forward. A man can be a gun. A mech then, my friends, can be anything we inhabit for a purpose, to solve a problem, to bridge a gap. A mech is a tower to heaven. But Sandland sees you, friend. It understands your innate desire to get in the robot, and so it provides you tantalizing clues around mid-game that you might, indeed, be getting in that robot, culminating in a moment where I could make parts for a robot I did not possess the frame to build. A frame that I would have to wait for a perfectly tuned moment in the story to acquire. And after all this time, I finally got to pilot the battle armor. And it was as good as I thought. Even in its base state, where it's kinda goofy and a little clunky, I could see the vision. Because this game had conditioned me. It had taught me that perseverance was worth it, that all these different fiddly little systems would pay off, that my thoughts and considerations while playing had already been accounted for, and then some. The design in this game is considered. The choices you make in customizing your mechs are as meaningful as any choice in any Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age, if not more so. Sure, you can get banged by a hot demon lady, but can she uppercut a tank into the stratosphere? Maybe. Maybe. All this to say, the battle armor is good. It's very good. The game spending nearly its entire runtime building up to the payoff of its promise, only for it to be revealed to me shortly after its acquisition that it was not the only traditional mech frame in the game. My BattleBot, nicknamed Iron Gene, rounds out the final spot on my roster. It's a mech that does everything you'd want a mech to do. It punches, it shoots, it runs, it hops. It's a powerful all-arounder that more than anything shows us that the developers of this game know exactly what they're doing. They made a mech game. In a just world, the fine folks at ILCA will go on to be the developers Capcom outsourced development of Mega Man Legends 3 to. A guy can only dream.
Except everything I just said pales in comparison to the real, unironic champion of Sandland's suite of mechs. My personal favorite ride in the whole game, a cruiser-style motorcycle chassis with legs, so fast and maneuverable it might as well be invincible, powerful enough to take on nearly every threat in the game, slap a giant rocket on the back for anyone cares, turn it into a Nier character if you want with a little shooty drone, fuck it, we ball! It's the Hopper. The Hopper is my favorite vehicle in maybe any game. Thank you.
I really feel some kind of way about the mechs in this game. I've come to love them and personalize them, each one feeling distinct and useful and mine in a way that's only possible due to the sheer breadth of customization this game allows you. And it's this desire to customize my mechs, to improve them with newly crafted and discovered parts and decals and paint jobs and EX chips that engages you and calls on you to explore Sandland's map, each cleared objective representing a tangible step towards improving those mechs. The world design then becomes more like that of a traditional 3D platformer, the spots on the map essentially becoming a string of coins that chart out an intended path through the world, each marker cleared directly translating to better, meaner, faster mechs that allow you to cruise through this world more efficiently. You find then that the smooth simplicity of the world and its objectives becomes your favorite thing about this game. Racing through the map, clearing objectives efficiently, facing regular combat encounters at each destination, it's a masterful, simple, playful little loop. The constant repetition becoming less of a painful, boring slog than a meditative induction to a trance-like state. You become one with the world. Its sand dunes and craggy cliffs and subterranean tunnels and forested coastlines and stunning, one-of-a-kind sunset vistas enveloping you like the comfiest blanket you can imagine. It's serene. But eventually, you will reach a wall where collecting resources isn't enough. People, after all, have to take the raw materials you collect and fashion them into usable parts for you. And that's where the people who populate this land, and their many stories, come into play. Sandland side quests were the bit of the game that took me the longest to come around on. What start off as seemingly rote side quests added to the game as a means of padding out its runtime, filling this vast open world with something, anything to do outside of riding your mech around, well, on first blush, they're really not much more than that. I don't blame anyone for taking a look at the structure of a side quest like the Tinkerer siblings, where the quest revolves around getting an objective to go and collect raptor scales for this guy, collecting the scales, taking them back to him, doing the same thing for his sister, and then picking which one of these two NPCs you like better, and thinking it sounds like the video game equivalent of pulling teeth. But the reward for this quest, the opening of a shop in Spino, the W&S Craftsman, that will allow you to create your own crafting supplies out of raw materials found out in the world, is the first sign that Sandland's side content serves an essential purpose. Spino is your home base. It's the place you'll return to constantly throughout the length of your playthrough, its centrality in possession of a garage where Anne can improve your mechs, making it an indispensable base of operations for you and your crew on your quest. It's your home, but Spino is also a ghost town. There are some folks living here, but their lives are hard and lonely. If you're going to be spending all your time here, if you're going to start calling this place home, then it behooves you then to talk to its people, to see what they need, to make friends, to start working to make Spino and Sandland a better place. And you do. The side quests available to you in the game mostly all centered around sending folks who live out in Sandland back to your home base of Spino, or helping out the residents of the town with problems they have, or with projects they'd like to see done. Spino starts out a desolate ghost town, but through your actions and the actions of others within the community, it becomes an oasis in the desert teeming not just with stores you use to buy rare parts and exchange old ones, but with characters you'll come to know and love. Mayor Tor, Hugh and Gite, Lirul and Shunen at the bar, Hecht and his daughter Rhea, all of these characters, these members of my community in Spino, feel like real people, both through their character and charm, but also through the things I've seen them accomplish, manifested in the layout of the town itself. Seeing Spino grow is satisfying because of the work you did alongside others to make it happen. And there's no character I feel more proud of working alongside of than Hugh. Hugh is a little boy, grandson to Mayor Tor, who has big ideas. He's sweet and precocious, but it's not until after Sandland regains its water that Hugh's true character is shown. Inspired by Lutemis, a furniture designer who we've helped start a business in town, Hugh wants us to help him build a water wheel that will function as a landmark for Spino, and will also provide the town with hydroelectric power. So you do the usual runaround of collecting resources and beating guys up for stuff, and in the end, Hugh and Lutemis build the town a water wheel. And it changes the appearance and character of the town. This giant, beautiful structure visible the moment you step within the town's gate. The sound of its wheel turning over the falls, a soft, calming sound heard now throughout Spino. You help a member of the community augment their home the same way you might customize your tank. And Sandland is full of quests like this. Quests that noticeably alter the world around you, stories of people and communities banding together to make their world a better place. When I walk through the streets of Spino, when I make my mechanically incentivized rounds to each of the various shops in town, I know the proprietors like they were my own friends. I help them build their shops. I entice them to come to town. I've helped fill these silent streets with laughter and chatter in stalls full of goods, homes full of people, once empty causeways now flowing with life-giving water, once barren land, now springing green. The side quests in Sandland are essential, not to be skipped material. They're not all winners, but even Sandland's more simple quests are filled with characters and stories that give life to Sandland in ways the manga and anime could never dream of. If there was one thing about the anime game Promise that was always almost fulfilled, it's this. The space to get to know this world through its people and their mundane problems, to revel in the day-to-day operations of a storefront, or reunite a man with his adopted daughter. You actually get to know all of these little people in Sandland, and the stories they tell are often really fun, quirky, and charming. It's good stuff. But the impact of the game's side quests doesn't just stop at getting to know the people who live in this world. Their lives loop back and help you on your quest. There's a resource exchanger you unlock through side questing in Sandland. There's a merchant you unlock that suddenly provides you with the mechanical incentive to delve into the game's many ancient ruins. Their exploration actually becoming useful once you realize you can spend ancient coins not just on treasure maps from this person we will not be discussing further, but on rare parts and blueprints and even entirely new mechs. And these are just a few of the places that open up to you by side questing, each shop being further upgraded through its own quest line. It's Nier and Nier Automata's side questing structure, focused around familiar NPCs the player built a personal relationship with, further focused through the transactional nature of needing to build bigger, badder, more bodacious mechs with which to conquer the game's map. The gameplay loop is now closed. The side quests provide the incentive that takes us back out into the world with a fresh perspective and some new objectives. They're not all the most interesting or highly budgeted side quests you've ever seen, but what they lack, they make up for in heart. There's just enough meat on their bones to keep you interested. The rewards are always sizable or interesting, but outside of closing the loop on the game's gameplay systems, the side quests here are doing something else. They're reinforcing the thematic point of the story. Side quests in Sandland tend to always be about bringing people together, about solving problems or turning enemies to friends, about breaking boundaries, about assembling the pieces of this fractured world into something beautiful. Through its gameplay, Sandland gently nudges you towards beginning to love your robots, forcing you to find preferences and improve upon gameplay styles you find compelling, the creation of parts to upgrade your mechs being about as pure an act of love as you could find in a video game. We choose to personify our robots, to give them little pet names, to obsess over the right color schemes and stickers, to dutifully gather resources so that we may make them more bodacious. But a cool, personalized robot, fit to our every specification and demand, is only possible if we know the right people to help us build it. So we form connections, we get to know people in this world. In the aim of fulfilling our own goals, we listen to their desires, their dreams, helping them with their chores or reuniting them with loved ones or simply offering them a place to call home. We build a community together with these people, building new homes and stores and fixing old ones, taking this once hollowed out spot upon the earth and making it a paradise. Before you know it, that dream of just building the biggest, baddest, most bodacious robot, well, it becomes a secondary objective. Before you know it, you've grown to love this place. Before you know it, you come to realize that attaining your best self is only possible when you've got others there to help. It's simple, but that's what Sandland is about. In a lot of ways, it's hard for me to talk about my experience with Sandland. If this seems like a joke given the runtime of this video, then yeah, it is, but also, it's a sign that I'm grasping here. Here's a game that, while ultimately a beautiful and novel experience, while also just a plain fun little video game, is a game where I can understand why it didn't sell as well as it did. I've spent this whole video trying to sell you all on the experience of playing this game, hoping that someone, anyone, sees this video, picks up a controller, and has the experience with it that I did. But the whole time, I've really just been trying to find justifications not against people who might play it and say it's bad, but against someone who might play it and just think it's okay. A middling game that really isn't as deep or as deserving of analysis and praise as I'm making it out to be. What do I say to those people? Sandland harkens back to a simpler time. Not to when games were simpler because they were any easier or mechanically and narratively less complex than they are now, but simpler because the expectations for what a game was and should be was more straightforward. There was an understanding, I guess, 20 years ago, that video games were, compared to movies and film, limited because of their possibilities. Here's a medium that can be read like a book, watched like an animated film, played like a sport, listened to like an album, hung out in like your own town or city or even your living room. Possibility space is so vast that if a project were ever to be both fulfilling to the vision of its developers and actually release, well then varying levels of pacing and polish were necessities that were more or less understood by gamers. You had to use your imagination to fill in the gaps. Something was required of you. Sandland, in 2024, abides by this ethos. A game that leans heavily on varying levels of polish due simply to the ambition of its scope and the exact weight of its budget. To detract from its highest highs due to its occasionally low lows, to see it for anything other than its passion and ambition, would be a disservice not just to your enjoyment, but to the work of its developers. It's a game I think deserves the space it's trying to carve out for itself. Something is required of you. I'm not saying that this game hasn't been positively recognized in any way. It's currently sitting at very positive reviews on Steam, but with a measly, at the time of me writing this, 791 reviews. For comparison between some other Bandai Namco games, as of December 2024, Dragon Ball Z Kakarot has around 40,000 Steam reviews, Elden Ring sits at over 700,000 Steam reviews, Gundam Breakers 4 sits at around 3,000 reviews, and One Piece Odyssey sits at around 2,000. While not completely indicative of sales figures, we can at least extrapolate that, compared to other games from the same publisher, mostly targeting the same corner of the market, Sandland did not get the exposure it deserved. Sandland will never do Elden Ring numbers, but it should, at the very least, in a just world, have done Dragon Ball Z Kakarot numbers. Put simply, if you like fun video games, if you're the kind of person who subscribes to 6th gen video game nostalgia Blue Sky accounts, or you've ever, and I mean ever, at any point in your life been a fan of anything Akira Toriyama put out, then you owe it not just to yourself to check this game out, but to its developers. Sandland is a love letter. There's something to be said about learning to love a game like this. A game that's a little rough around the edges, that occasionally frustrates, that's not afraid of showing you where its budget ends. But there's so much heart here, a real passion shown towards bringing its source material to life in a way that feels unique and earnest, and once you see it, it's impossible to not see just how much this game cares to flesh this world out. The love and reverence for the source material shines past whatever the budget was, or whatever the amount of marketing was, or whatever number of letter A's are prefixed before its name. This is a game that deserves your time. It's not perfect, though what in this world ever has been? It's got heart, and it's calling on you to open up yours. There's a line that Rao will repeat as you traverse the open world about how, if we can't help each other, only death awaits us, that I really think might be at the very core of what this game is trying to say, what it employs its narrative and quest structure to do. All that time spent building robots and meeting people and rebuilding this world, bringing to life a decades-old vision from a master storyteller, it was all about this. We have to help each other. We have to help games like Sandland. So much hay has been made about the current state of the games industry. Things are bleak, perhaps bleaker than they've ever been, inherently corrupt corporate interests eroding away the fabric of so many talented people's livelihoods and passions. It's a miracle then, in a lot of ways, that Sandland even exists in today's climate. One could argue that it was perhaps created under cynical auspices, a megalithic publisher contracting an at-best middleware support studio to create an anime tie-in game as a means of rounding out a media portfolio for investors, but what we got from the folks at ILCA is so much more than that. They gave Sandland the treatment it deserved, eulogizing a legend through their work. That is special. That is worth fighting for. That is worth giving attention to. Do we have a responsibility as an audience to help games like this out? To extend an olive branch to overworked, passionate developers, and help them out by seeing what they saw in a game like this? If we can't help each other, if we can't lift up a game like Sandland as a unique vision, as a fun, self-contained experience, as a touching tribute to a man who touched so many lives with his work, then what awaits us?
Sandland is the kind of game a 9-year-old plays, and it changes them forever. It's in a lot of ways a gateway into so many different worlds, so many avenues of discussion, that it almost belies the kind of perfect simplicity of its design. It's a simple little game about a little guy who pilots a bunch of mechs, goes on a cool adventure with his friends, stops a big bad evil guy, and saves the day. It's a game that's very rough and loose around the edges. It's kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of cool ideas that don't come together in the neatest possible way, but when they do click together, they gesture at so much. At themes of community and responsibility and guilt and finding one's true purpose. To employ a cliche, it's just more than the sum of its parts.
There's this hard and desolate place I know of, a land of craggy cliffs and vast stretches of rocks and sand, but it's the strength of its people that shines above it all. They're a hardy bunch, close-knit yet welcoming, their resilience coming from the closeness of their communities. I've gotten to know some of them. During my visit, I've helped them with their problems, I've run their errands, I've taken part in their customs, I've become their friend, and they've become mine. Alongside some of them, we built this little town. We're all really proud of it. I really hope someday you can come visit. Sandland is a place worth visiting.